For more on the rise in crimes based on prejudice in the U.S. and globally, I spoke to Brian Levin. He's a criminal justice professor at California State University, San Bernardino. And I asked him if the increase in racism, crimes based on bias, and xenophobia is related to a wave in populism.
Well, the polls seem to indicate that. And indeed, this populism, even if it does not win at the polls, and we've seen in elections, it's more so much having outsiders come in, as we've seen in Italy and in elsewhere, than it is necessarily just xenophobia or anti-immigration. But what I will say is there are bigger issues that then combine to tie into this apprehension and fear. So what I'm saying is, when we have an increase in nationalist sentiment, when we have an anti-globalist sentiment that exists throughout, for instance, Western Europe and North America, invariably there will be fringes that will take that and translate it or retransmit it into a message that goes from nationalism to fear to bigotry. And I think that's what we're seeing now. These are interdependent variables.
What about the perpetrators in these cases? Is it difficult to find and prosecute the people responsible for hate crimes? What do you think the common thread, the motivation behind these hate crimes are, regardless of the location or the group that it's directed at?
That's a great question. Researchers at Northeastern University many years ago came up with three basic types, and there's been some tinkering since then. But the first type are really thrill offenders who have a very shallow depth of prejudice, but they still understand stereotypes. So if they're under pressure or peer validation, they will go after, almost as a social event, as an informal group of friends, to attack the other. Then we have the defensive or reactive offender who's responding to a violent act or somebody coming into their neighborhood, moving into their neighborhood. And their prejudice is a little bit more substantial, but still they can operate in the real world. Next are the mission offenders. These are the hardcore hate mongers, like the Ku Klux Klan or skinheads. They represent a sliver of the hate crimes that are perpetrated in the United States, but they are they're disproportionately represented, rather, with respect to the most violent hate crimes, like hate crime homicides. So we have different types of offenders, but they all respond to negative stereotypes, prejudice against the other, which labels people from those groups as legitimate targets for aggression.
Brian, what's the best deterrent here then? Is it tougher laws, more education? What is the answer?
Well, tougher laws are good, but we must remember that most hate crimes are not prosecuted under hate crime laws. They're prosecuted under straight criminal law statutes. Moreover, many of these crimes are not solved. What I will say is, when law enforcement pays attention to it, it does make a difference with respect to deterrence. However, it's also part of our civic good, our educators, our community leaders, to get together and say, irrespective of our differences, coarseness is not the way to achieve civility in our society, and we have to dialogue. I think that's really important. This is not a problem that's going to be solved from police enforcement alone. Although, for criminals who act violently, it is important to send a message out that there is a consequence for your actions.